It took exactly 47 seconds for the room to shift from quiet anticipation to taut stillness. Representative Ted Lieu, a veteran of congressional oversight hearings, leaned forward, palms pressed against the polished mahogany table. His gaze swept the room, rows of reporters with cameras poised, staffers scribbling notes in near-silent frenzy, and the senators themselves, some frowning, some tapping pens against folders, all waiting. Across the chamber, FBI Director Kash Patel sat perfectly composed, hands folded, eyes steady, his expression unreadable beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. The room smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, a scent that carried centuries of political power. The Capitol hearing chamber was cavernous, marble walls reflecting every flash of camera light, amplifying the tension. Microphones lined the long desk where witnesses would speak, tiny red lights blinking like watchful eyes. Liu's questions were ready, organized in neat stacks, each labeled by law, clause, and anticipated crosspoint. Yet even as he exhaled slowly, confidence coiled tightly in his chest, he sensed the unpredictability of the man before him. Every detail mattered. The air conditioning hummed low, the sound mingling with the scribble of pens, the occasional cough, the muted shuffle of papers. Staffers leaned forward, whispering summaries to one another, exchanging glances that hinted at the high stakes. The cameras clicked intermittently, capturing the first glimmers of an unfolding political drama. Liu's colleagues murmured, "He's been briefed. This will be clean." Yet the room carried a palpable uncertainty. Patel's calmness was almost deliberate, a visual counterpoint to the rising storm. He adjusted a stack of documents, tapping the edge lightly, a rhythmic motion that drew attention to the folders marked classified, internal memos, and budget allocations, FI 2024. Light reflected off the lenses of the senator's glasses, bouncing off the polished table, illuminating subtle micro-expressions. A twitch of an eyebrow, a slight pause before a pen resumes its note-taking, a tightening jaw. Senator Thompson, seated directly behind Liu, cleared his throat softly, signaling the start of the hearing. "Representative Lieu, Director Patel, the committee thanks you for being here," he began, his voice steady but imbued with authority. Cameras swiveled. Microphones captured each word. Liu's pulse quickened. He had prepared meticulously for this moment. Every potential contradiction in Patel's record, every inconsistency in memos, every gap in surveillance logs, he had memorized them. The opening question hovered on the tip of his tongue, yet before Liu could speak, Patel exhaled lightly, the faintest of smiles touching the corners of his lips. There was no hesitation, no tremor, only a poised calm that seemed to bend the room to his rhythm. It was an almost imperceptible challenge, the kind that invited scrutiny yet dared confrontation. Cameras caught the moment, Patel's eyes locking with Liu's, unblinking, almost surgical in precision. The senator's gavel hovered above the polished wood. Silence enveloped the chamber like a physical weight. Every observer, every note-taker, every flash of light waited for the first question to pierce the air. Liu leaned in, his voice low but steady, ready to assert control, to corner the director in ways that would make headlines. Yet beneath the practiced cadence, a flicker of uncertainty passed through him, an instinctive awareness that this hearing might not unfold according to script. The first word left his lips, the cameras clicked, and in that precise instant, the world within the chamber shifted. But the silence wasn't over yet. The gavel struck once, echoing sharply against marble walls. Representative Liu straightened his notes, his voice steady, almost clinical. "Director Patel," he began, eyes locked, "can you confirm whether the FBI's internal audit of foreign surveillance operations in fiscal year 2024 adhered to the mandates outlined under Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act?" Patel's fingers interlaced, resting lightly atop a neat stack of memos. "Representative, the audit adhered to both statutory and internal compliance requirements," he replied calmly, his tone even, almost rehearsed. His eyes scanned the room, absorbing every subtle motion, the flick of a pen, the tightening of a senator's lips, the small pause as a staffer scribbled notes faster than usual. Liu leaned forward. "And the reported discrepancies in budget allocations, $12. 7 million unaccounted for in covert operations. How do you explain that?" His hand tapped lightly on a yellowed folder, the rhythm sharp in the tense silence. A bead of sweat glinted on a clerk's forehead, the only sign of unease. Patel's gaze did not waver. That variance was reconciled within our internal appropriation schedules. The seeming discrepancy reflects timing differences between fiscal reporting periods and operational expenditure recognition, fully compliant with the Appropriations Act of 1921. A flicker of tension passed through Liu's jaw. He shifted, adjusting his glasses, scribbling numbers that seemed suddenly unclear. Senators around the table leaned closer, watching every movement, noting the subtle interplay of voice, pause, and hesitation. Director Patel, Liu pressed, softer now but no less pointed, did any internal memos indicate a directive to bypass congressional notification for foreign surveillance operations? His pen hovered, poised to underline key words. Patel's response was measured. No such directive existed. All operations were reported per statutory requirements. Any claim suggesting otherwise is inconsistent with both FISA Section 702 reporting obligations and DOJ oversight protocols. Silence followed, almost tangible. The microphones hummed lightly. Staffers shuffled papers, pens scratching the polished mahogany. Camera flashes punctuated the stillness, catching fleeting glances. A senator's eyebrow raising, a clerk exhaling sharply, a note being quickly folded and passed. Liu's confidence was visibly shifting. His questions became precise but slightly more aggressive. Can you explain why a surveillance log dated March 14, 2024, shows an unencrypted internal communication flagged as high sensitivity? Patel's eyes flickered briefly to the folder. Representative, that communication was internal, strictly within secure channels, and properly classified. No statutory or constitutional breach occurred. The flagging reflects internal labeling, not a compliance failure. A soft murmur rippled through the chamber. Senators exchanged brief glances, noting Liu's slight pause, the subtle tremor in his hand as he turned a page. Every movement was magnified under the relentless scrutiny of cameras and microphones. The room was a study in controlled tension. Liu's mind raced through memos, budget sheets, and surveillance logs. Patel remained unflappable, a human metronome of composure. Even the air seemed charged, the hum of fluorescent lights amplifying each subtle sound. Director Patel, Liu asked finally, leaning closer, voice steady but eyes betraying a flicker of doubt. Were there any instructions that might be interpreted as circumventing congressional oversight? Patel's reply was a soft, almost imperceptible pause. Then, Representative, all instructions were issued in accordance with constitutional mandates and statutory obligations. Nothing exceeded, bypassed, or undermined oversight authority. The chamber held its breath. Cameras clicked in rapid succession. A sense of unease settled over the witnesses' table, over the senators, over the reporters, like a slow, creeping fog. The first subtle shift had occurred, but no one could yet predict its magnitude. The first revelations had begun, but the room's silence promised there was far more to come. By mid-morning, the chamber had settled into a rhythm of measured tension. Every pause, every flick of a pen, every subtle intake of breath was amplified under the harsh fluorescent lights. Liu's questions grew sharper, the legal stakes becoming increasingly explicit. He leaned forward, voice steady but eyes narrowing, scanning a classified internal memo he had brought to the table. Director Patel, Liu began, tapping the document lightly. This internal memo dated February 2, 2024, references limited congressional disclosure regarding surveillance operations on foreign nationals. How do you reconcile this with the explicit requirements of FISA Section 702? Patel adjusted the folder before him but remained calm. Representative, that reference pertains to operational security protocols. At no point were statutory reporting requirements violated. Section 702 compliance was maintained. All activities were documented in the official reporting channels and submitted to the appropriate oversight committees. A murmur passed through the chamber as a camera flash caught the reflection off Patel's glasses. Senators exchanged glances, some leaning forward, others scribbling notes furiously. Liu's pen hesitated above his notepad. The contradiction between the memo's language and Patel's verbal assurances was subtle but unmistakable. And the internal surveillance logs, Lieu continued, voice rising slightly, specifically the entries marked redacted under internal classification protocol. Do these documents indicate any deviation from the Appropriations Act of 1921 or the DOJ's internal oversight mandates? Patel's fingers tapped lightly on the table, almost rhythmically. Representative, no deviation occurred. The redactions you mention are standard for sensitive operational information. They do not constitute circumvention of oversight. All appropriated funds were accounted for, and reporting followed statutory requirements. Liu's eyes flicked toward the senior senators. There was tension in their postures, the subtle tightening of hands, the soft brushing of papers. He turned a page and found a budget allocation sheet marked with missing entries, amounts totaling nearly $4. $3 million. He leaned forward, voice measured but firm. Director Patel, these figures indicate unreported expenditures. Under the Appropriations Act, Section 302(b), all allocations must be disclosed. How do you account for this discrepancy? Patel's gaze remained steady, unyielding. Those expenditures were operational reserves authorized under pre-approved directives. They were documented internally and reconciled within the appropriate fiscal reporting cycles. At no point was there any legal or constitutional violation. A slight tremor ran through Liu's hand as he underlined passages in the memo, realizing the complexity of the defense before him. His colleagues leaned forward, noting the micro-expressions. Patel's calm precision contrasted with Liu's subtle agitation, the shift in body language unmistakable. Then, the cameras caught it, a brief pause, a folded note slipping from Patel's folder. He allowed it to fall, paper sliding across polished wood, a small but deliberate visual signal. Liu noticed, and the room's tension intensified. The silent implication was clear. Patel had anticipated every line of questioning. Every potential misstep was mapped, documented, and counted. And internal communications from March 14 to March 18, Liu pressed, which appear to omit certain congressional notifications. How does that align with the constitutional requirement for legislative oversight over executive surveillance? Patel's lips curved slightly in a controlled expression of calm. Representative, those communications were procedural clarifications. There was no circumvention of congressional authority. The Constitution's separation of powers was fully respected. All oversight channels remained operational and effective. The chamber's atmosphere shifted. Even as Liu continued flipping through the folders, the first seeds of doubt had taken root. The tension was no longer only legal, it was deeply personal. His confidence, once unwavering, began to waver under the unflinching composure of Patel. Every document, every clause, every footnote now seemed to speak against him. The first legal bombshell had landed, but the most shocking revelation was yet to come. The room had grown oppressively silent. Every breath, every scratch of a pen, every subtle shuffle of paper amplified under the relentless fluorescent glare. Representative Liu's fingers trembled slightly as he reached for the next folder. He had prepared meticulously, cross-referencing memos, internal logs, and surveillance schedules, but the calm precision of Kash Patel had systematically dismantled each assumption. Director Patel, Liu began, voice slightly unsteady. The internal report dated March 16 clearly shows a deviation from Section 702 procedures. Can you explain why congressional notification appears incomplete? Patel's response was almost surgical, deliberate. Representative, no deviation occurred. Reporting was consistent with statutory obligations, and all congressional oversight was preserved. Any appearance to the contrary is a misinterpretation of operational documentation. Liu blinked rapidly, scanning the pages before him. Something was wrong. His carefully prepared notes, meant to corner Patel, now seemed contradictory, misaligned with the very evidence he held. The folders, once reassuring, felt suddenly alien, the fine print exposing gaps in his understanding of the legal framework. A bead of sweat traced down Liu's temple. The camera lenses captured the micro-expressions in exquisite detail. The tightening of his jaw, the slight quiver of his hand, the rapid, shallow breaths. Senators shifted in their seats, silent but observant, watching the unraveling with clinical precision. In the next 47 seconds, the entire chamber changed. Lieu misquoted the Appropriations Act, citing Section 302(b) incorrectly. He referenced a budget allocation discrepancy as a legal violation, failing to recognize that operational reserves were pre-authorized and fully documented internally. Eyes widened, pens paused mid-scribble. The director's calm stare became a mirror reflecting Liu's faltering certainty. Representative Patel's voice remained calm, almost gentle. Section 302(b) governs the apportionment of funds, not the operational reserves in question. Your interpretation misstates both the statute and its applicability in this context. This constitutes an error in legal reasoning, not a procedural oversight by the Bureau. A low murmur spread across the chamber as the reality set in. Liu's notes scattered slightly, a pen rolled off the polished wood, and the subtle click of a chair shifting echoed like a gavel striking justice. For 47 seconds, the room existed in suspended disbelief, every observer aware that the carefully built image of control had collapsed. The cameras zoomed in on the precise moment. Liu's hand froze mid-gesture, his lips parted as if searching for the words that could salvage authority. They did not come. Senators exchanged glances, some sympathetic, some restrained, and even the staffer's whispers faltered. The legal mistake was clear: misapplication of statutory authority, misreading of budgetary law, and a failure to account for internal compliance mechanisms. It was fatal, institutionally and reputationally. Patel's expression never changed. Calm, composed, unshakable. The contrast could not have been starker. Every clerk, every reporter, every observer in the chamber recognized the legal and symbolic weight of the moment. Liu's authority, meticulously constructed over years, had crumbled in under a minute. The gavel hovered in midair, the room's silence absolute. Liu's eyes darted to the senior senators, a flicker of disbelief and frustration crossing his face. For those 4 to 7 seconds, the controlled world of congressional oversight, political strategy, and legal precision seemed to fracture, exposing the raw vulnerability beneath. The cameras clicked relentlessly, capturing each heartbeat, each twitch, each whisper of paper. The silence lingered, heavy and insistent. The collapse had occurred, legally and visually, and the ramifications were just beginning to unfold. By late afternoon, the Capitol had emptied of casual observers, but the echoes of the 47-second collapse reverberated far beyond the marble walls. News outlets across the nation picked up the story instantly. Broadcast anchors spoke in measured tones, their expressions reflecting disbelief and fascination. For 47 seconds, America watched competence collapse, intoned one evening news anchor, the camera cutting between a frozen frame of Liu mid-falter and Patel's unyielding composure. Legal analysts dissected every word, gesture, and misquotation. On cable networks, constitutional scholars debated the misinterpretation of Section 302(b) and the proper application of FISA Section 702, noting that Liu had conflated budgetary apportionment with operational reserve accounting. This is one of the most devastating Senate takedowns since Watergate, one expert said, voice calm but firm. Another commentator added, the representative's misstep wasn't just political, it was a failure of legal precision. In congressional oversight, precision is everything. Print media splashed headlines, Representative Liu stumbles under FBI scrutiny and Patel's poise exposes oversight gaps, not Bureau compliance. Public reaction was swift. Social media dissected the moment frame by frame. Screenshots of Liu's stunned expression circulated widely, accompanied by commentary ranging from sympathetic to scathing. Citizens debated the nuances of congressional oversight, FISA law, and operational transparency in forums previously reserved for legal scholars. Within Washington, the fallout was equally immediate. Senior senators quietly discussed internal protocol reviews. Staffers whispered about the procedural implications. A public misquotation of statute, coupled with misinterpretation of classified budgetary procedures, was a rare but politically significant failure. Committee chairs considered issuing clarifications or minor reprimands, but the message was clear. Liu's authority had been publicly undermined, and trust in his legislative judgment was momentarily shaken. Inside the FBI, the mood was controlled but charged. Analysts reviewed the hearing footage, confirming Patel's consistency in adhering to both statutory and constitutional obligations. Internal memos emphasized that the Bureau's processes remained intact, yet the optics, the nationwide visibility of Lieu's faltering, posed reputational risks. Even allies in the DOJ noted quietly that the incident would require careful handling to prevent misinterpretation by Congress or the press. The political consequences extended further. Opposition leaders seized the moment, citing the incident in speeches, while editorial boards debated whether such a collapse reflected systemic flaws in congressional oversight or merely an individual misjudgment. The general public, many encountering the complexity of FISA law for the first time, oscillated between outrage, confusion, and fascination. Every report, every flash of the chamber, every analyzed 47-second clip contributed to a narrative larger than the hearing itself. Amidst the whirlwind, Lieu retreated to review the transcripts, his staff quietly supporting him, aware that political recovery required both legal clarity and public recalibration. The director, Patel, emerged with his composure intact, unshaken by the media storm, leaving the nation to process the implications of the moment without a single misstep. Even as pundits debated, cameras replayed, and citizens commented, one reality remained undeniable. The legal precision of oversight had been tested, and the spectacle had left a mark far deeper than any memo or report could capture. For the Capitol and the country, the hearing had become a case study in procedural rigor, personal composure, and the unforgiving scrutiny of public and institutional observation. Questions lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. The chamber, now empty and echoing, seemed smaller somehow. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany tables. Outside, the marble hallways of the Capitol carried the faint murmur of footsteps, the low clatter of security boots against stone, a reminder that life within these walls continued even after history had been quietly rewritten in real time. Representative Lieu sat alone for a few moments, reviewing the transcript once more. The clarity of the legal missteps, the misapplication of Section 302(b), the misunderstanding of FISA Section 702, and the misreading of internal operational memos, pressed upon him like the weight of the room itself. Each page reflected the high cost of assumption, the fragility of confidence when confronted by meticulous precision and calm authority. Lieu's ambition, meticulous planning, and hours of preparation had collided with an unexpected reality. Legal mastery and personal composure could outweigh rhetoric, even in a room designed to showcase power. Kash Patel, meanwhile, walked quietly down the marble corridors, his posture measured, his composure intact. The cameras had left hours ago, the reporters dispersed, yet the chamber's silence followed him like a shadow. Every step echoed against the stone, a quiet testimony to the enduring separation between procedural duty and public spectacle. For Patel, the hearing was not a victory, but a reaffirmation of the rigor demanded by law, the clarity of process, and the subtle power of restraint. In offices across Capitol Hill, staffers and analysts reflected on what they had witnessed. Legal scholars drafted commentaries, dissecting the implications of the hearing, exploring the boundaries of congressional oversight, and clarifying statutory interpretations. Politicians recalibrated speeches and strategy, mindful that the optics of authority and knowledge could shift dramatically in a single moment. For observers, the incident became a study in dual truths: how one's preparation can be both meticulous and fallible, and how institutional knowledge must be matched with personal discipline. Washington, in its quiet persistence, moved on. Committees continued their work, budgets were reviewed, operational reports filed, and public discussion gradually shifted to other crises. Yet the memory of those 4 to 7 seconds lingered. It became a whispered caution in corridors, a benchmark for aspiring legislators, and a case study in law schools. The collapse, the calm, and the meticulous defense were repeated in seminars, lectures, and news retrospectives. For Lieu, reflection carried weight beyond politics. It was about precision, accountability, and humility, the recognition that knowledge of law is not merely procedural but existential in its consequences. For Patel, it was about the discipline of restraint, the quiet power of expertise, and the profound responsibility that accompanies oversight. In the quiet aftermath, when the cameras were gone and the microphones silent, the Capitol exhaled, leaving only a lesson etched in marble, paper, and memory. Washington doesn't punish ignorance. It replaces it. Some careers end in scandal. His ended in silence.